Ethan Crowley, Laura Crowley, and Sheriff Daniel Hayes, three lives that seemed ordinary, intertwined by routine and trust, were about to collide in a way no one in their quiet Midwestern town could have imagined. What started as a normal morning would spiral into a shocking crime, a web of lies, and a chilling revelation that would leave the community questioning everything they thought they knew. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. The town sat quietly between long stretches of farmland and narrow highways that rarely saw heavy traffic. Most people who lived there had grown up together or were related in some way. News traveled fast, but real trouble almost never arrived. The biggest concerns were broken fences, late utility bills, or harsh winters. Serious crime belonged to television shows, not this place. That sense of safety made the events that followed even more disturbing. At the edge of the town stood a modest house with a wide porch and an old oak tree in the yard. This was where Ethan Crowley lived. He was seen as dependable and predictable. He worked regular hours, paid his taxes, and spent weekends outdoors. Hunting season was important to him, not just as a hobby, but as an identity. People associated him with discipline and patience, qualities valued in the community. From the outside, Ethan's life appeared stable. He waved at neighbors, attended town meetings, and kept his lawn neatly trimmed. Nothing about him suggested chaos or danger. Yet inside the walls of his home, things were far less calm. The quiet of the house did not bring peace. It carried weight, filled with stress that had nowhere to go. Problems were ignored rather than solved, slowly piling up over time. Money was one of those problems. Bills arrived faster than paychecks, and small debts turned into heavy burdens. The pressure of keeping up appearances in a town where everyone noticed everything added to the strain. Failure felt public, even when it happened behind closed doors. This constant tension changed the atmosphere of the home, making it feel smaller and darker with each passing month. Ethan also carried a strong need for control. His hunting routine, his schedules, and his habits were tightly organized. When life began to slip outside those patterns, frustration followed. The calm face he showed the world did not reflect the thoughts he kept to himself. Anger did not explode outward. Instead, it stayed hidden, growing slowly and quietly. The town itself unknowingly played a role. Its silence created space for secrets. People assumed familiarity meant safety. When someone seemed normal, no one looked closer. This allowed warning signs to go unnoticed. Small changes in behavior were brushed off as stress or fatigue. No one imagined something dangerous could take root in such a familiar place. As days passed, the calm of the town continued, unaware it was approaching a moment that would redefine it forever. The house by the oak tree blended into the landscape, holding its secrets tightly. What appeared to be an ordinary life was already moving toward a breaking point. The stillness that defined the town was not a sign of peace, but a quiet before something irreversible. The marriage between Ethan and Laura did not fall apart suddenly. It wore down slowly, shaped by routine disappointment and unmet expectations. In the early years, their relationship had seemed balanced and hopeful. They shared plans, worked toward common goals, and believed effort alone would keep everything steady. Over time, that belief faded as reality grew heavier and patience thinned. Daily life became repetitive and draining. Both carried responsibilities that felt larger than their ability to manage them. Long workdays left little energy for connection, and exhaustion replaced meaningful interaction. Small disagreements were never resolved. Instead, they lingered, stacking quietly until they formed an emotional wall neither wanted to confront. The house felt crowded even when it was silent. Financial stress deepened the divide. Expenses increased while income stayed the same. Every purchase felt risky, and every bill brought tension. The pressure created blame, even when neither fully understood who was responsible. Trust weakened as frustration grew. Hope for improvement slowly turned into resignation. What once felt like teamwork now felt like survival. Laura changed in subtle ways. She became more withdrawn, spending time alone and avoiding shared routines. The warmth she once carried faded, replaced by caution and emotional distance. She appeared restless, as if constantly weighing her options. Friends noticed she seemed tired, though she never explained why. Her unease stayed mostly hidden, confined to private moments. Ethan responded differently. He became rigid and focused on maintaining control where he could. His routines became stricter and his need for order increased. Any disruption felt threatening. He saw the growing distance not as a signal to change, but as something to be managed. Instead of addressing the root problems, he concentrated on appearances, determined to keep everything looking normal. Their home reflected the state of their relationship. Rooms felt empty even when filled with furniture. Shared spaces were used separately, and time together became rare. There was no dramatic conflict, only a steady decline into emotional isolation. The absence of communication became louder than any argument ever could. The town saw none of this clearly. From the outside, the marriage appeared intact. They attended events when expected and exchanged polite gestures in public. In a place where privacy was respected and assumptions were common, no one questioned the distance between them. Familiarity created comfort, and comfort discouraged curiosity. As months passed, the strain became part of daily life. The idea of repair felt distant and unrealistic. Each carried private thoughts they never shared, shaped by fear, resentment, and uncertainty. What bound them together began to feel more like obligation than commitment. This growing divide set the stage for what came next. The tension inside the home was no longer temporary or manageable. It had settled deeply, shaping decisions and perceptions in dangerous ways. What seemed like a quiet marriage was in fact fragile, held together by habit alone, moving steadily toward a moment where everything would finally collapse. The morning began like many others, quiet and uneventful. The sky was pale, and the air felt still, as if the day itself was holding its breath. Inside the house, nothing appeared out of place at first glance. There were no signs of a struggle in the main rooms, no broken furniture, no obvious chaos. The calm made what followed even more unsettling. Emergency responders arrived after receiving a report of a gunshot. When they entered the home, they found Laura lying on the floor, injured by a hunting rifle wound. The damage was severe, and despite quick efforts, she was declared dead at the scene. The suddenness of the situation shocked even the most experienced responders. A life had ended in a place meant to be safe. Ethan was present when authorities arrived. He appeared shaken but controlled. He explained that the rifle had fired accidentally while he was handling it earlier that morning. According to his account, there was no argument, no warning, just a tragic mistake. Accidents involving firearms were not unheard of in rural areas, and at first, the explanation seemed possible. However, the scene itself began to raise quiet concern. The rifle was not found where one would expect during routine handling. It rested in a position that suggested intention rather than carelessness. The room showed no signs of cleaning activity. There were no tools, no cloths, no oil, nothing that supported the idea that the weapon was being maintained at the time. The position of Laura's body also stood out. The angle of the injury did not align easily with a random discharge. It suggested a controlled direction rather than an unpredictable event. These details did not immediately point to guilt, but they created unease. Investigators noted everything carefully, knowing small details often held the truth. Outside the house, the town slowly became aware that something terrible had happened. Police vehicles and emergency lights drew attention, but no clear information was shared. Neighbors watched from a distance, confused and uneasy. The idea that such a violent event could happen there felt impossible. Rumors began to form, but facts were still scarce. Inside, investigators moved carefully, documenting every corner of the home. Each observation added to a growing list of unanswered questions. The calm appearance of the scene did not match the gravity of the outcome. It felt staged, as if something important had been removed or rearranged before help was called. As the morning turned into afternoon, the case quietly shifted. What was first considered a tragic accident began to feel uncertain. The absence of panic, the placement of the rifle, and the lack of supporting evidence all suggested there was more to uncover. No conclusions were made yet, but the foundation of doubt had been laid. That morning marked a permanent divide between before and after. A quiet home became the center of an investigation, and a simple explanation no longer felt sufficient. What happened inside those walls would soon be examined from every angle, and the truth, whatever it was, would not stay hidden for long. As investigators continued their work, the early assumption of an accident began to weaken. Every element of the scene was re-examined with greater care. What once seemed ordinary now appeared deliberate. The hunting rifle, central to the case, drew the most attention. Its condition alone challenged the explanation that had been offered. The safety mechanism was still engaged, a detail that immediately raised concern. Accidental discharge under those conditions was extremely unlikely. The lack of supporting evidence became more troubling as time passed. If the rifle had been handled for cleaning or inspection, there should have been signs. There were no fingerprints smudged with oil, no cleaning cloths, and no open cases or supplies nearby. The room itself appeared undisturbed, almost too orderly. Investigators recognized this kind of cleanliness not as proof of innocence, but as a potential attempt to control the narrative. Attention then turned to the physical details of the injury. The trajectory of the shot was carefully analyzed. Experts noted that the angle suggested a stable stance rather than a sudden, careless movement. The shot appeared precise, not random. This precision did not align with the idea of a momentary mistake. Instead, it hinted at intention, or at the very least, awareness. Ethan's timeline was also examined closely. The sequence of events he described contained gaps that could not be easily explained. Small inconsistencies appeared when compared with forensic estimates. The timing of the emergency call, the position of objects in the room, and the lack of urgency in certain actions all stood out. None of these details alone proved anything, but together they formed a pattern that could not be ignored. Investigators also began to consider behavior. While emotional reactions vary, the calm nature of the situation felt out of place. The environment did not reflect chaos or confusion. There were no signs of frantic movement or distress. This absence of disorder suggested that what occurred may not have been sudden or shocking to everyone involved. As the hours turned into days, the case quietly shifted direction. The word accident became less common in reports, replaced by more cautious language. Authorities did not rush to judgment, but their focus sharpened. Each detail was treated as a potential clue rather than a coincidence. The house itself seemed to hold unanswered questions. Its stillness felt heavy, as if it concealed more than it revealed. Investigators understood that scenes often tell stories without words. Here, the story was one of control, order, and silence. These qualities, once seen as harmless, now felt unsettling. By the end of the initial investigation phase, doubt had firmly taken hold. The explanation offered no longer fit the evidence. What began as a tragic mishap was now viewed through a different lens. The case was no longer about what went wrong, but about what truly happened. And that shift marked the moment when the truth started pushing its way to the surface. As investigators moved beyond the crime scene, attention turned to the past. What people hide in daily life often becomes visible only after something goes wrong. Records, routines, and digital traces began to reveal a version of Ethan that few had seen clearly. The calm image he presented to the town started to fracture under closer inspection. Financial documents were the first to raise concern. Bank statements showed mounting debts spread across multiple accounts. Credit cards were nearly maxed out, and several payments had been missed in the months leading up to the incident. The pressure was not recent or temporary. It had been growing steadily, creating a sense of urgency that contrasted sharply with Ethan's composed appearance. The strain suggested desperation rather than stability. Then came the discovery of a life insurance policy. Laura had been insured for a significant amount, and the policy had been updated not long before her death. Investigators noted the timing carefully. While having insurance is common, sudden changes close to a death often demand explanation. The update stood out as a calculated decision rather than a routine one, especially given the couple's financial condition. Digital evidence added another layer. A review of search history revealed repeated queries related to firearm mechanics and discharge behavior. These searches were specific and technical, not casual or general. They showed a clear interest in how weapons function under certain conditions. The timing of these searches, occurring days before the shooting, made them impossible to ignore. Investigators also examined Ethan's recent behavior. Co-workers described him as increasingly distracted but intensely focused when discussing future plans. There were signs of mental preparation, subtle shifts that made sense only in hindsight. He appeared less concerned about long-term consequences and more focused on immediate outcomes. These changes suggested internal planning rather than emotional collapse. Laura's recent activity painted a different picture. Her communications showed uncertainty and unease. She had begun organizing personal documents and reviewing financial information, actions that implied she was preparing for change. Investigators considered whether she sensed something was wrong. While nothing directly indicated fear of violence, the pattern suggested emotional distress and awareness of instability. The more the past was examined, the less accidental the incident appeared. Each discovery aligned with the growing theory of intent. The pieces did not contradict one another. Instead, they fit together tightly, forming a clearer picture of motive and preparation. What once seemed like unrelated stressors now appeared connected. By the end of this phase, investigators understood they were no longer searching for what went wrong in a single moment. They were uncovering a chain of decisions made over time. The shooting was not an isolated event, but the final outcome of months of pressure, planning, and concealed intent. The past, once ignored, had become the strongest voice in the case, quietly explaining what the scene alone could not. The case reached a critical stage when forensic experts began their detailed analysis. Science took over where assumptions ended. Every mark, measurement, and microscopic trace was examined to reconstruct what truly happened inside the house. The rifle was tested first. Specialists confirmed it was in proper working condition and showed no mechanical faults. The safety feature functioned exactly as designed, meaning the weapon could not fire unless deliberately disengaged. Gunshot residue analysis provided another key insight. Traces found on Ethan's hands were consistent with firing the rifle, not with casual handling after the fact. The distribution patterns suggested a steady grip and controlled trigger pull. This detail alone challenged the idea of a sudden, accidental discharge. It pointed toward intention rather than surprise. The position of Laura's body was then examined in greater detail. The angle of entry and the path of the projectile indicated that the shooter was standing still and facing her directly. Experts ruled out scenarios involving stumbling, dropping, or unintended movement. The shot came from a fixed distance, carefully aligned. The precision removed any remaining doubt that the rifle had gone off randomly. Blood pattern analysis added further clarity. The stains showed no evidence of movement after the shot. There were no signs of attempts to help or reposition. This absence of activity suggested that what happened was expected rather than shocking. The scene reflected control, not panic. Investigators noted how the lack of chaos contrasted sharply with the claim of an accident. The medical examiner's report added another layer. While the fatal wound was immediate, the report also documented signs of prolonged emotional stress in Laura's body. Elevated stress indicators suggested she had been living under constant pressure. Though not proof of violence, it supported the idea that her final months were marked by fear or uncertainty. This context strengthened the prosecution's understanding of the household dynamic. Time of death estimates were matched against digital records. Phone activity, home security data, and appliance usage created a narrow window that aligned with the forensic findings but conflicted with Ethan's timeline. Small discrepancies added up. The version of events he provided could not be supported by measurable evidence. Each forensic result narrowed the possibilities. Accidental explanations were systematically eliminated, not through opinion, but through fact. The science told a clear and consistent story. Investigators no longer asked if the shooting was intentional. They focused instead on how carefully it had been carried out. By the end of the forensic review, the case had transformed. What began as uncertainty became clarity. The evidence spoke without emotion, cutting through excuses and assumptions. It revealed a deliberate act hidden behind a simple lie. The truth was no longer buried in complexity. It stood exposed, waiting to be presented. When the case moved into the courtroom, the town felt the weight of what was coming. The same people who once saw Ethan as ordinary now watched closely as his life was examined in detail. The trial did not rely on emotion or speculation. It unfolded through facts, timelines, and evidence collected over months of careful investigation. Every detail mattered, and nothing was treated as coincidence. The prosecution focused on building a clear sequence of events. They showed how financial pressure had grown over time and how recent decisions pointed toward preparation rather than panic. Records, dates, and expert findings were presented methodically, each piece connected to the next, forming a steady narrative that explained how the shooting fit into a larger pattern of behavior. Forensic evidence became the backbone of the case. Experts explained how the rifle functioned and why it could not have fired accidentally. They described the significance of residue patterns, trajectory angles, and body positioning. These details were technical but powerful. They removed uncertainty and replaced it with certainty grounded in science. The idea of a simple mistake became harder to believe with every explanation. Digital evidence added another layer of impact. Search history, financial updates, and insurance changes were presented in context. The timing of these actions showed intent forming before the incident occurred. What once looked like unrelated activities now appeared purposeful. The jury was shown how planning often hides behind normal routines until examined closely. The defense attempted to frame the event as a tragic combination of stress and error. They emphasized the lack of prior violence and the absence of witnesses, but these arguments struggled against the consistency of the evidence. Stress alone could not explain precision. Error could not explain preparation. The gaps in Ethan's account became more visible as the trial continued. The town followed the proceedings closely. Each day brought a deeper understanding of how little they had known. Familiar assumptions were replaced with discomfort. The realization that someone so ordinary could carry out something so calculated unsettled many. The case forced the community to confront the limits of appearances. As the trial neared its end, the focus shifted from what might have happened to what was proven. The evidence did not rely on emotion or character judgments. It relied on facts that aligned too closely to dismiss. By then, the idea of an accident no longer held weight. It had been dismantled piece by piece. When the verdict was delivered, it confirmed what the evidence had long suggested. The conclusion was not sudden or shocking by that point. It felt inevitable. The courtroom outcome marked the end of the legal process, but not the emotional impact. The town was left changed, carrying the knowledge that truth often hides behind calm surfaces, waiting for careful attention to bring it into the light. After the verdict, the town felt a mix of relief, disbelief, and sorrow. What had been considered a tragic accident was now recognized as a deliberate act. The reality of Ethan's guilt settled slowly, like a shadow stretching across familiar streets. People walked past his home with new awareness, noticing details they had once overlooked. The house, once ordinary, now seemed heavy with secrets. Life in the town did not stop, but it changed. Conversations among neighbors carried a subtle tension. People questioned how well they truly knew those around them. Ordinary routines were now tinged with caution, as if the calm of daily life had been broken forever. The case became a silent reminder that danger can hide in plain sight, even in the most trusted spaces. The investigation itself continued to be a point of discussion. Police and forensic teams had meticulously reconstructed the events, relying on evidence rather than assumptions. The precision of their work demonstrated how truth often emerges slowly, built from small observations and careful analysis. Without patience and attention to detail, the crime might have remained a claimed accident, buried under layers of plausible explanations. For the family and friends of Laura, the conclusion brought mixed emotions. Grief remained, intensified by the knowledge that her death had been intentional. There was no closure in the sense of surprise. Rather, there was clarity. Understanding the full circumstances did not ease the loss, but it provided an explanation that allowed people to place the events in a concrete context. Laura's life and death were no longer clouded by uncertainty. Ethan's punishment marked the final act of the legal process. Sentencing reflected the severity of the crime and the deliberate nature of his actions. It was a stark contrast to the calm persona he had maintained for years. The contrast between public image and private reality became a central theme in conversations about the case, reinforcing the idea that appearances can be dangerously misleading. The community also learned a broader lesson about vigilance and awareness. Subtle signs of trouble, when ignored, can accumulate into tragedy. The case prompted reflection on how small details, changes in behavior, unusual actions, or minor inconsistencies can signal larger problems. It underscored the importance of paying attention, even in places where trust has been assumed. As time passed, the house on the edge of town remained empty. The oak tree outside stood unchanged, a silent witness to events that had forever altered the landscape. Life slowly resumed around it, but the memory of what had happened lingered. People who had once walked by without thought now did so with a different perspective, reminded that danger and deception can exist behind ordinary walls. Ultimately, the case of Ethan Crowley became more than a story of crime. It became a story of hidden truths, patient investigation, and the revelation of intent behind a carefully constructed lie. The accident that was never truly accidental became a lesson for the town and a testament to the power of evidence in uncovering the reality beneath appearances. The truth, once revealed, left an indelible mark, shaping the town's understanding of safety, trust, and human complexity.